What's up, YouTube? I'm CT Grommer, and this is my channel. I got my two trusty steeds behind me. This is a 1969 Honda Trail 90 and a 2014 Honda Grom. And for the purposes of this video, I want to go over what I believe are a lot of similarities and subtle differences between the two bikes, and specifically how everything that Honda poured into this bike was, kind of an easy transfer over to this bike. They got a lot of things right with this bike, and I'm going to go over some of those things today. Oh, and by the way, we're going to ride them both today. But they got a lot of things right with this bike, and it was kind of easy for them to bring this bike into the 21st century with this bike. So anyway, let's get right into some of those similarities and differences. So regarding the Honda Trail 90, which I believe this is the perfection that gave birth to this. So you got to go back to here in the 60s. Honda did a lot of things right with the Trail 90, and they built this bike around an unbelievable power plant. This bike is rugged. I mean, anybody that's ever had this bike will tell you they didn't really maintain it besides change the oil. If you just change the oil in this bike, it will continue to just perform for you over and over and over. The fact that this bike sits here today and is able to be ridden in, what is it, March? It's March of 2018. This is a 1969 bike. I mean, how many 1969 bikes do you see still putting in work today? That to me is a testament to this power plant that they absolutely perfected. It's a super simple power plant, and they both have it. This is an updated version, but it's the same basic engine. It's a single piston engine, 2 valves, overhead cam. It's air cooled. This one has an automatic transmission. That one has a manual transmission. I'll get into that in a second. But they perfected the engine, and they both have the same one, and that's something that I wanted to kind of really emphasize, because the bikes are built around the engine, but they perfected this engine. Next, I wanted to get into some of the, the differences between the bike, and probably the most obvious difference. The first thing we see, the most obvious difference is the aesthetics. In the 1960s and the 1970s, by the way, they produced, between the late 60s and the 80s, they produced millions of these bikes. The biggest difference aesthetically is the fact that this is kind of a trail bike, and it's styled like a 60s or 70s trail bike. Honda kind of coined the whole trail bike thing. But anyway, this is a bike that, looking at it, it's kind of one of the most, it's kind of the original dual sport bike, if you will. It's got knobby tires, it's got pretty long suspension, and it's styled like a trail bike, and it's styled like the 1960s because, heck, this thing's old. And then obviously going into this thing, we travel into the 21st century, and you get some awesome sport bike styling, and that's a pretty big difference. The second small difference between the two bikes would be the, I would say, the displays. This has got digital displays. It's got RPM. Well, I'll just tell you what it's got. It's got fuel gauge on it. We'll touch on that. That does not have a fuel gauge. This has got a digital fuel gauge. It's got digital RPM. It's got digital speedometer, and it's got trip A, trip B, and miles, and it keeps the time. Now, going over here, we've got the total miles traveled, and we've got a neutral light, a high beam, low beam light, and a turn indicator light. That has turn indicators too. But that's it. that's absolutely all we have, and an analog speedometer. So two very different bikes in that regard. And I think I touched on over here, this has got a fuel gauge. This does not have any fuel gauge. I'll show you your fuel gauge on this bike. Here we go. You guys watching? Oh, yeah, well, it needs fuel, so just kidding. That's one way to do it, but a better way to do it is the carburetor is set up. It's got a fuel indicator here, so you can turn the fuel off, You can turn the fuel on. When you run out of fuel, you can turn the fuel here to reserve, and you get, well, I've never had to do that, so I actually don't know how far that gets you. The next difference between the two bikes is a manual transmission versus an automatic transmission. This bike, when we ride these bikes, you'll see the difference. This bike has an auto clutch, 4 speeds all the way down. So if you're in neutral, first, second, third, fourth, third, second, first, neutral. So pretty explanatory. This is, you know, this is one of the more, I mean, every bike is like this. You got, well, almost every bike is like this. You got clutch in, first, neutral is between first and second. Oh, I was able to get it on the first try. All the rest of the gears are up after that, 4 speeds. Both have 4 speeds, auto clutch, manual clutch. One of the next things I wanted to touch on between the two bikes is carbureted bike versus electronic fuel injection, which is really, really cool that this bike is electronically fuel injected. This bike, it also has electric start. This bike, you can literally jump on the bike, start it, give it some gas, and take off. And it's awesome. It's automatically sensing how much air and fuel the bike needs at any point in time. This bike is carbureted, so the air and fuel mixture are constantly set. No matter if you're at 8,000 feet or sea level, it's going to give you the same amount of air and fuel, which is not exactly a good thing, because there's a lot of things that can change. So on this bike, you got to kick start it, and you know, that can be a little bit of a pain. Then you got to choke it, then you got to let it sit there, you got to let it warm up, and once it's warmed up, you can turn the choke off, then you can give it some gas, then you can kind of take off, and it's just, if you goose it, it's going to die on you for 2 or 3 minutes until the bike is warmed up, and then you're going to be able to get going. The last thing that I think is a pretty cardinal difference between the two bikes is comfort. And again, I'll touch on this while we're riding. This bike can be ridden for hours and hours and hours. I mean, you're in a super ergo position on the bike. Oh, it's got a center stand. That's nice. You're in a super ergo position. The seat is plush. You don't have to lean. And this bike can be ridden for 8 hours, and you're just going to be grinning from ear to ear the entire time. While this bike is more of a sport bike, the seat is very hard. I mean, very, very hard. And, you know, it's not that the position is bad, but the seat is narrow and it's hard. And so, you know, after about 45 minutes for me on this bike, but I'm trying to build up my stamina, but for me on this bike, I get kind of tired. I mean, my ass literally kind of gets fatigued. So, anyway, hey, enough about that. Let's ride the friggin' bikes.
CT90 versus Grom. Kind of on the bike review. They both have good things, bad things about them. But this bike probably to me is a tiny bit more fun to ride because it's just a little bit faster. It really glides and is just happier, drives in a straight line, turns better. It's just a little bit more fun on the road than the CT90. But the CT90 up in the foothills or up at Shaver Lake, or, you know, just in dirt in general, the CT90 kicks ass. I've got knobby tires on mine, which is how they came. The CT90 has a dual range transmission, which you can flick a switch down at the gearbox forward, and you've got 4 low gears. And the CT90, I swear to you, will climb any hill in that first and second gear, low gear. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just the torquiest thing, and it's unbelievable. And I'll have to show that to you, whereas this bike, you know, this bike would never do that. But this bike's got, you know, if you stayed in first gear and put some knobbies on it, it would do okay. It's got twice the horsepower that the CT90 does. I think the CT90's got like 5 horses, where this has got, you know, 8 or 9, I think. In an urban street environment, this bike, it just does better. It's smoother, it's faster, the power is better, it flicks around, it's got blinkers, it's got modern electronics, it's got modern fuel injection. At speed at 45, 50 miles an hour, it tracks straight as an arrow forward. It feels pretty stable. That CT90, the faster you go, God, that thing is all over the place, and I'll be showing that to you. when I ride it next year. But anyway, up in the foothills, up in any sort of you know, dirt, road to dirt, or dual, you know, dual sport type situation, the CT90 is going to whoop its ass. It just will. And you know, it's interesting, they are not, you know, from a frame and suspension standpoint, yeah, what's up, dude? But the engine in both of them is almost identical. They have the same exact Honda power plant that was designed in the late 50s, or well, I think it's like the mid 60s, that has remained through the Honda 90 and Honda 110 years completely unchanged. It's a rock solid, legendary engine that, as long as I mean, you change the oil, as long as you change the oil, this engine is going to perform for you. And it really is just an outstanding power plant, and you can't go wrong. It's an amazing power plant that's in both of these bikes. And God, they're both addicting to ride. They really are. So I have a lot of fun on them. In the city, it just seems like this one's better though. The suspension's a little bit better. It's got a sport bike feel, and top speed is a big issue on the 90. You're hard pressed to get 40 miles an hour out of it. I mean, if you get into a tuck, maybe you can get 45, 50, but you're going to be pushing that poor engine so friggin' hard to get that kind of speed out of it, where this one, you know, it's not a stretch to get 40 miles an hour out of it, and it's not a stretch even to get 50 miles an hour out of it. And these engines, you know, they're, especially this Grom engine, they're happy to sit at the, you know, I wouldn't call it at the red line, but they're happy to sit, you know, almost maxing out 50 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour for 10 minutes, 20 minutes at a time. I mean, these bikes will do it. If you redline any sport bike, any dirt bike, anything like that, and you're sitting there revving it out, redlining it like that for even a couple of minutes, I mean, you're going to blow the damn thing up. And on this bike, that's just not the case. If you have any questions about the two bikes, feel free to comment below. And I'm happy to give you any advice, or just give you my 2 cents on any of this stuff. I'm going to hop on the 90. Next time you see this, we're going to be on the 90. This is me signing off on the Grom for now, guys. Thanks. Okay, everybody, I give you, in the flesh, the original Honda Grom. This is a 1969 K1B Honda Trail 90, but anyway, this is the K1B. It's the one model year. They did this funny funny air box. The later ones came up and got air from up here because they think you're going to ride in the dirt and stuff. I put a newer Chinese carb on it instead of the really expensive Honda carb. I rebuilt the top end on this bike. It runs amazingly. And hey, let's take it for a spin and talk about it some more. All right, center stand. We are now on one of the most comfortable bikes I've ever ridden in my life. Plush suspension. We got a neutral light to indicate that you're in neutral. The biggest difference between this and the Grom is probably the fact that it does not have a clutch. This is a rear brake, that's a front brake. Rear brake, front brake, rear brake. All the speeds are down, so I'm going to shift to first right now and just give it some gas. Watch this. Thing just takes off. Check that out. Everyone looks at these things like I'm some kind of frickin' weirdo. Gotta give hand signals because I do not have signals on this bike, but I do have a headlight and a brake light. It is street legal. It is currently registered, so that's nice. Okay, so see this, back to neutral. Well, actually my neutral light's not working very well lately. I don't really know why, but we're in neutral. So we're gonna go to first again, automatic clutch. There's first. Here we go. This is such a fun bike. Just mashing gears. Listen to this bike. Much louder than the Grom. Okay, so this is everything she's got right here. This is another big difference between the Grom and the CT right here. Look, this is goose. So, I mean, 45, 46, that's it, guys. That's all she's gonna give you. So again, my neutral light is just not working, but, oh, it turns on. Okay, so we're in neutral, but you can actually just leave it in first. See, check it out. Give it some gas, and away we go. Check that out. Shift to second, which is down. Shift to third. Check that out. Gonna turn right, no problem. Make the hand signal. Shift backwards to second. Which is, by the way, really, really cool that they do this. So the shifter on this is, let me make sure no one's behind me, is really cool. So you can push back instead of trying to go like this, you know, you can just push back. It's freaking awesome. They think of everything. It does not like to shift when you're not moving, as you can see. Oh, but this bike is my original baby. I mean, I've had this one for a while. I absolutely love I love this bike. This bike is so much fun to ride. It just flicks around. It feels so light. You're on top of it and not really in it. Like on the Grom, it's more of a sports bike. This thing is like you just turn it and, you know, lean and it just goes where you want it to go. I see why everybody you talk to is like, oh dude, I learned on a Honda 90. I learned on a Trail 90. I mean, they're just not even looking. Did you guys see that? Not even freaking looking. Unbelievable. Anyway, people learn on these bikes all the time. They love these bikes. I don't blame them. This bike is so freaking comfy. I was saying while I was on the Grom, I'm like, dude, I can't sit on this seat more than, you know, maybe 45 minutes, an hour. My ass is killing me. This is the most plush, freaking comfortable seat I've ever ridden. It's seriously, just gonna get off the bike and show it to you with this freaking lady. Who knows what she's gonna do next? This bike is loud, especially compared to the Grom. This bike is so freaking loud, which is cool. If you're gonna ride a tiny ass bike like this, people really do need to see you. So yes, it's good that it's loud. I'm wondering how well you guys can hear it in the microphone. This thing is a little screamer, man. Here, so I'll give you the when we go here, I'll give you what this bike can do. So here's first, I'm just gonna goose it. This is everything right here. I don't want to push it any harder. She's not going to be happy if I push her any harder. So, almost 50 miles an hour. But this bike is just, dude, it's so much fun. I mean, how do you not get stoked? How do you not get stoked on this bike? Anyway, it's just freaking awesome. Oh, it smells hot now. I can definitely smell the bike as well. So we're just going to go easy on her. Nice and easy. Oh gosh, guys, it's starting to rain. That sucks. It's fun to ride this bike a little bit more, but we're starting to get some rain. So I'm going to have to probably cut this video short. If you like what you guys see, subscribe. I'm going to be riding the CT here. I'm going to be riding the Grom around Clovis and Fresno, California. Please hit that subscribe button. Don't if you don't want to, but just come watch my videos. You like seeing these old CTs still go in 2018, commute people, get them from point A to point B, you know. Watch my videos. I'm going to be riding the Grom and the CT. Hope you guys have a great day, and stay safe out there, alright?